everybody, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I'm building R.E.A.R Max. This is a classic kit from Estes, and actually the reason I'm building this today is because my rocket club is going to have a themed launch in June that's all about graduation. And so we've all been asked to build a rocket kit that was around when we graduated from high school. And for me, one of the few that I can get today that was available back then is this particular model. The build is going to be the same, although the decorations I used are going to be thematic of my high school. Fortunately, my high school colors were black and red, and so a lot of this is going to look the same. So let's go ahead and open this up and see what we have. Now we have our nose cone, main body tube, engine mount, fin stock, centering rings, and decals. And then in a small parts package here we have the parachute shock cord mount, launch lugs, engine block, motor mount sleeve, and motor clip. So let's see how that compares to our instructions. Alright, it looks like we've got everything. Our first task is to assemble the motor mount, and you're going to need parts from all of the different bags. So the motor mount centering rings were in the same bag as the fins, and then the small parts here were in the other small parts bag, and the motor mount tube itself was in with the body tube. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do here is mark one end as aft on the inside so I don't get it turned around later. And then we're going to take my ruler and we're going to mark at 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch, and another mark at 6.4 centimeters or 2.5 inches. Alright, and you want to extend these out a little bit because the engine clip will cover up part of them. Alright, in the forward mark here, we're going to cut a 3 millimeter or about 1/8 of an inch slit, and then the right angle end of the motor clip is going to go right into that, so it just pops in. Alright, and this is why I had us make our marks a little bit wider so we don't cover that one up. Okay, and then this sleeve here is going to go over, and that will stop at that second mark we made. So here we're going to add a little bit more glue. And this doesn't have to be really thick. It's not really going to be taking any stress. It's just going to keep the engine clip from moving. So you kind of smear that around there, and then just move this down into it. And any excess you can just form into a fillet, like that. Okay, and then using an applicator or a piece of scrap balsa or something, we're going to put some glue right above the engine clip there, and that will hold the thrust ring or engine block. And so here I'm just going to put some down inside and go around in the circle. Again, we want an even bead, but not a lot, because we don't want drips going down inside the motor tube. Alright, and we're going to push that down in there until it reaches the top of the motor clip. And the glue is starting to grab there, so just be aware of that. Okay. That looks to be about it. Alright. Then the next thing we need to do is cut out the centering rings here. You can probably just pop these out. If they're really stuck, then go ahead and use your hobby knife. Now these other two things here are fin guides, so we don't need those quite yet. Alright, once you get these out, go ahead and just take a little bit of fine sandpaper and just sand off those little nubs. Alright, so one of these, the one that's got the little notch in it, is going to be the aft ring, and this is going to snug up against the retainer there. Alright, no glue on this yet. And then the forward one is going to go just at the edge here, like that. Alright, and just leave enough room that you can make a glue fillet there. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and back that one off a little bit. Now this one you do want not sloppy glue, but adequate glue that it will be able to take the strain. Okay, and just push that up against it like that, and it's going to push all the glue forward. And then just take your finger here and make a fillet out of that. Okay, and then down on the other side, let's make sure that's all seated perpendicular there. You can add a fillet here. Try to avoid getting glue on the clip. Like that. Okay, and then this excess glue I have on my finger, I'm going to put right up here. I have to add a little to it. Okay, and then this ring will go like that. Okay, and then we'll make a little bit of a fillet up here. Alright, and then on the back side you can just smooth in whatever glue got squirted up ahead of it there. And now we're going to let that completely dry. Next we're going to work on the fins, and ideally if your fins are still in the sheet, this is the best way to start. If not, you just have to do this individually to each fin. So first I'm going to start with some 100 grit sandpaper and just do the whole face, sanding with the grain. Alright, and then just after a few strokes there, I'm going to go to 150 grit and use that to do most of the smoothing. Then once you've got that, take your hobby knife and cut the little nubs here holding the fins on. this is our leading edge, and this is our root edge here. And so the root edge we want to sand flat, so just enough to take off the little nubs there. Okay, and then at the very least you'll want to round the leading edge here. The tip edge and the trailing edge, you can either round them or leave them flat. I'm going to make mine flat. Alright, and then to round this, I'm going to start by taking 100 grit sandpaper and just sanding the corner edges so they're no longer sharp. And just alternate that a few times. Okay, and then as you go, you can start to rotate your wrist to impart a curvature to it. And flip sides here frequently. Alright, and frequently check the cross section here. So you can see mine's a little lopsided. That tells me I need a little bit more sanding on this side. Alright, and then again, once you've got the main shape in there, then take some finer sandpaper, 150 grit here, and do the final smoothing. Okay, now this particular sheet of balsa is really coarse and porous, so we may need to add some strengthening to these. Well, we'll come back to that. For now, I'm going to go ahead and do the other two fins off camera, and then we'll come back. Alright, I have my fins sanded, and now what I'm going to do is paper laminate them using adhesive paper. So this is basically label paper, and you can get this in lots of different sizes. Okay, this is six almost square labels to the page here, and they're pretty much the exact same size, or exact right size that we need. So I'm going to take a label here, sticky side up, and now I'm just going to place one of the fins in it so that we've got paper all around. All right, I'm just going to press that down. Alright, and if you've rounded your edges, you can kind of bring that up onto the rounding there. And then we'll take another one and put it on top. Like that. Okay, and then we're going to put these under something heavy like a big book and let them just press down for a few hours so that we get good adhesion throughout the fin there. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing for the other two fins off camera and then put them all under a big book or three. I've let my fins press for several hours under these two tomes. Alright, and so now what we're going to do is just trim off the excess paper here. And I'm going to do this in stages so that I don't end up cutting the fins. It looks like I need a new blade. You'll definitely want a fresh blade for this. Alright, so first just cut off coarsely the remnants here. Alright, and then once you've got just some little bits remaining here. You can come in and just gently shave away. Okay, so that once you've got it down to just a little bit of paper overhanging here, then what we'll do is apply some super glue to the edges. Okay, just regular consistency super glue is fine. We don't want a whole lot here. What we're doing is just stiffening the edges so they'll be sandable. And this also helps lock the paper into place. Okay, now you don't need to do the root edge here. Okay, but do the other ones. Alright, and go ahead and repeat that with the other two fins. I'm going to do that off camera. The super glue has dried on my fin edges. You can see the glossiness there. And so now the paper is very stiff, and this allows us to sand it. And so I'm going to use some 150 grit sandpaper here initially. Alright, and the most difficult one is going to be the leading edge again, and any other edges that you round it. Basically, you're just going to round them again, removing the excess paper and glue. Alright, initially I got a lot of glue on this. I'm going to go drop down to 100 grit here initially. Okay. And you may expose a lot of the wood here again, and that's fine. We're just going to blend it in. Okay, so we're getting back to it there. Alright, so now I'm going back to 150, and I'm just blending in the paper with the wood and the glue there. For the other edges, we just need to bring that back flush. Alright, now you may get a little ridge like that, and that you can just sand off. Okay, and if you get little bumps and such here, just sand those down as well. here, I'm going to leave this ridge in place because that'll give me a wider gluing surface. Alright, so there's one fin pretty much done. And again, this is all optional. If you just want to sand your fins and put them directly on the rocket, that's fine. But this does increase the strength of the fin, and it also gives you a nice smooth finish to start with. I'm going to keep on doing this with the other two fins off camera. Our next task is to mark the tube for the fins and the launch lug, and that's what these other shapes here are for. And so we can just pop these out. If they're really stuck, you can use your hobby knife to cut them loose. They should come out fairly reasonably. And this is kind of unusual. I've never seen this on an Estes kit before. Alright, so if we come to the instructions, what we do here is simply put the tube through these two and stand them on the flat face there, or the flat edge. Alright, so we'll just put one on one end and one on another. Alright, and then rotate it so that both are flat against the work surface here. And then when you've got that, you can just go in here and mark at each point where the fin or the launch lug is going to go. So the top one here that's facing directly up is for the launch lug. I'm just going to mark a little L down here so I know that. Okay, and I'll mark it up here as well. Alright, and then we just take the guides off once more. And you can place this against a door frame or a drawer edge, or if you have one of these tube marking guides, they work really well. But we're just going to go through and connect the dots. And I just like to make the line go all the way down the tube. You can erase it later, but this gives you the maximum sight line to help align your fins and your launch lug and everything. Alright, so you have 4 lines on there. Okay, now before we put the fins on, we're going to put in the engine mount, and we want our engine mount to go in so that the clip is in line with our launch lug line right here. Make that a little more visible. Alright, so I'm just going to dry fit this first. Okay, it's actually a little bit tight, so we'll just take a little bit of sandpaper here. And I think it's just due to the little nubs on there, so we'll just give that a little bit of sanding. Okay, I'll try that again. That's a much better fit. Alright, so we would then rotate that so that, let's see, where did my launch lug line go? Oh, wrong end. Here we go. Alright, still a little bit of a grab there, and I think we just need to chamfer out the tube edge with a thumbnail here. So just kind of work it outward. There we go. Okay, now when we actually put this in, we're going to want it to be flush, so the motor tube should be flush with the body tube. And I'm going to show you a little bit different way to put in this and glue it. So they're starting off with a ring of glue up inside, which we want. And I'm just going to use a cotton applicator like this. That one's got glue on it already. Alright, here's one. And what I'm going to do is first measure from the forward centering ring back and put my thumb right there. And I'm going to give myself a little bit more room. So I'm going to move my thumb up a little bit because I want the ring to actually pass through the ring of glue. Alright, so here I'm just going to dip it into my glue. You can use white or wood glue for this. Okay, now I'm going to stick it in without touching the edge until my thumbnail hits, and I'm going to bring it up and rotate that all the way around the tube. Okay. Now I'm going to place the forward ring in, but I'm not going to go all the way up yet. I'm going to leave that open. Okay, and then I'm going to put another ring of glue about an inch upward so that the aft ring will hit that ring of glue. And that'll make it so you don't have to be as concerned about trying to get a fillet into there. We'll still try that. Okay, so now I'm going to rotate this around once more so my clip is where the launch lug line is there. I'm going to push that up and then use my ruler as a flat edge here to make that flush with the body tube. Okay, now I can look down inside there, and using our applicator once more, now I can add additional glue as a fillet all the way around in there. Alright, and then I'm just going to wipe off the excess glue along the side. Oop. Defective stick there. Or at least smooth it out so it's not in big lumps there. Okay, we'll let that dry for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we will start putting fins on. In preparation for the launch lugs, we need to make a line at 5 1/4 inches or 13.3 centimeters from the aft end on our launch lug line. Okay, so I'm just going to put this on here. 13.3 is right there. Alright, and I'm going to take a little bit of sandpaper and roughen up the areas where the launch lugs are going to go. Now the launch lugs are pretty small, so we only need like 1/2 inch or so here. And you don't have to go really deep. All we're doing is roughening up the glossy surface of the cardboard. And that just gives us a better place for the fins to attach. And then on the fin lines, I'm just going to get a rough idea of where that fin's going to go and do the same thing here. So I'm just going to roughen up where the fins will get glued on. Okay, and that's all there really is to that. My fins are ready. I've sanded them all so that the paper is once again flush. And so for this, once again use white or wood glue. Okay, and start out with just a very thin, uniform layer of glue. You don't want this really dripping. And if you saw that little ridge of paper, you want that to go outward. And this is going to give us a little bit more area to glue. Alright, the aft edge of the fin is going to go at the aft edge of the body tube. And I'm just going to pop that on there like that and then pull it off once more. And I'm going to let that get tacky for about 30 seconds. It's been about 30 seconds. I'm going to put this right back on where I had it. And the two surfaces now have gotten tackier so that they should hold very easily and not just fall off as soon as I let go of it. All right, and now I'm going to sight down, and this is part of the reason I like to have the line going all the way down. It gives me a good sight line so I know my fin is straight, and we also want it upright and perpendicular. Okay, and if that all looks good, then just let that sit and dry. for 10 minutes if you're using wood glue, longer if you're using white glue, and then you can go on to do the other 2 fins and the launch lugs. I'm going to do those off cam. My fins are attached, and now I'm going to put on the launch lugs. And this goes on pretty much in the same way, except you really don't need to wait for them to get tacky. So here I'm just going to apply a little bit of glue, and these are very tiny launch lugs. Alright, and the aft one is going to go right flush with the body tube there. Okay, and you can use that entire line to help get it straight and parallel. Okay, and then the other one is going to go up at that mark we made at 13.3 centimeters. So right up here. Okay, and again, you can use that line to help ensure that you're straight. Okay, and then you can sight along both of them, kind of like a gun sight here. And they should line up with each other and still be in line with our launch lug line. And they look to be such. Okay, maybe a little hint of adjustment here, but they're pretty close. Alright, so we'll let those dry for a few minutes. Now, this next part is optional, but you should be able to do it while the launch lugs are drying, as long as you don't bump them. So one of the things you can do to help prolong the life of your motor mount here is just put a little bit of super glue around the edge so that it soaks into the cardboard. And especially if you got a motor mount like this one that's basically just raw cardboard, it doesn't have any type of coating on it. So just run that around the edge, let it soak in for a few seconds, and then just wipe off the excess. Okay, and make sure the engine clip doesn't get glued to it. But this will just help prevent some wear and tear on the cardboard tube when you put the motor in. You can do the same thing up here at the opening of the body tube, and this will help prevent damage from the shock cord or damage from repeated insertions of the nose cone. And kind of the same way, it's just stiffening the cardboard and making it a little bit more resilient. Okay, so once you've got it all the way around, just let it soak in for a few seconds. And then wipe off the excess. Now in some cases that might make the nose cone tight, and all you have to do is just take some very fine sandpaper and just sand it down a little bit there. Alright, I'm going to continue to let the launch lugs dry, and then we'll come back and do the fillets. While we're waiting for glue to dry, I want to turn attention to the nose cone. Now this feels like it's made out of either polypropylene or polyethylene, neither of which binds to paint very well. And so you're going to want to take some fine sandpaper. I'm going to use 220 here to start with. And first of all, we'll sand down the seam here between the two halves of the mold, just to smooth that down. Okay, now that's knocked down most of the ridges here, although we do have this little bit of a valley right there and a little bit of one right here. You have a couple of choices with this. You can just ignore it. You can sand it some more, but that may weaken part of the nose cone. Or you can use some plastic contour model putty, like this stuff, to fill in that gap there. I'm going to go ahead and first just finish sanding all the way around here so that I've got a good paintable surface, and then I'll come back and see what I'm going to do with those seams there. Now, offhand, it looks like I got most of the creases out of the little seams there. I'm going to take a few tissues here, moisten them with alcohol, and wipe this down. You can also just use water. Alcohol just evaporates faster. But once we remove the sanding dust, we'll get a better idea of what we've got left in here. Alright, you can still see a little bit of the seam there, but it's much less noticeable than it was before. And I'm going to treat this with two primers actually. So the first is going to be what's called a universal bonding primer. And it does chemically kind of what the sanding does here. So it leaves a kind of a tactile surface that paint can attach to easily, and it's specifically made for difficult to paint surfaces like polyethylene and polypropylene. So I'm going to put a coating of that on first, and that kind of leaves, it's almost a bubbly appearance. And then we'll overcoat that with a filler primer that's sandable, and that will give us a smooth surface, and then after that we can put on whatever color we like. So here's how the nose cone looks after the universal bonding primer, and I don't know if you can see it in the video too well, but it actually has a bit of texture to it here. It's not a nice smooth primer. Got a little bit of a run there, but we'll sand that off later. After this dries, and before I sand it, I'll go ahead and apply the filling sandable primer to it, and that will fill in some of those little bumps and ridges there and give me an even better painting surface. And then we'll sand a lot of that off, recoat it, and then give it a color coat. Now keep in mind, this is like maximum overkill here. Usually you can get away with just sanding the nose cone with 220, maybe up to 320 grit sandpaper, and then using your favorite primer and top coat. Alright, this is just to give some additional stickiness to your paint if you want that. Alright, my fin glue is dry enough that we can go ahead and put fillets on. And once again, use white glue or wood glue for this. Starting with the fins, I like to do facing fins at a time here. So I'll just go ahead and run a bead of glue down both sides here. Alright, and then take a finger and smooth that in. Alright, and if you got a little gap like up here on the top like I've got, just kind of fill that in as well. Alright, and now just let this dry in a horizontal position, at least a good hour, maybe more. Let them get completely dry before you do anything that's going to involve resurfacing them. You may need to redo some of the fillets, so if you get bubbles or cracks in them, you can apply another layer, but it's best to let this first layer dry first and then add another layer if you need it. You can also use as a top layer some of this plastic model contour putty. You don't want to use this in place of glue fillets, but you can use it over it to build the fillet up or give you a very smooth fillet. This is made by Testers. There are several other brands out there depending on what your local hobby store carries. My fillets are dry enough that we can handle the rocket, and as you can see here, there are some bubbles in there that are going to need filled. It needs to dry just a bit more before I can do that. But it is dry enough that we can go ahead and attach the shock cord. And in this kit, the shock cord mount actually comes as a separate part, so you don't have to cut up the instructions. We do need to cut it out of its cardboard here, though. Alright, so now we're going to need our shock cord out of here. Alright, that's kind of a short shock cord, I guess, since it's a short model. Alright, and what we're going to do here is run a bead of glue across the 2 and the 3, fairly heavy. We want a good sandwich of glue here. And I'm going to put the shock cord in at a bit of an angle. And that's because as we fold this up, that'll cause it to lie beside itself rather than on top of itself. Okay, now we're going to fold the 1 over onto the 2. Okay, we have to readjust the shock cord a bit. And then fold the 2 onto the 3. Okay, and then go ahead and squish that down really well. We want to get all the air out of there so that we've got a good laminate of cardboard and glue. All right, and then impart a curvature to that. Apply some more glue to this whole face. Again, we don't want it dripping, but we do want it nice and uniform all the way through. Looks like we could use a little more glue there. Alright, and then this needs to go down beyond the shoulder of the nose cone inside. Let's see if it tells us here. At least 1.5 inches. And my rule of thumb is go down as far as you can reach. Okay, so just slide that down. You can barely see it there. And I'm going to turn this over so the glue side is down. All right, and then holding the rocket, I'm just going to press that up against the inside of the tube. Again, try and squishing as much air out as we can so we just have layers of glue and cardboard in there. Let's see. Alright. And again, if you got long, skinny fingers, get this down as far as you possibly can. Alright. And then I'm just going to let that dry for a little while. Up on the other end, eventually we will connect the other end of the shock cord to the nose, but right now the nose is being primed for painting. While we're waiting for the shock cord mount to dry, let's go ahead and take a look at the parachute. Go ahead and open this up. And this is a pretty large parachute for this size of a model. Now, part of that is so you can get the nifty death's head there. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is just gather up all of the shroud lines on one finger here. Okay, I want to make sure that they are uniform in length. So I'm going to grab the middle of the parachute with my other hand here. Alright, so here I got all the loops of the shroud lines there, the parachute here, and by moving those loops relative to each other, all the corners of the parachute should come down fairly close to each other. And they do within a reasonable amount there. Okay. Now, according to the instructions, they just tie the parachute directly onto the nose cone. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos, though, you know I absolutely hate doing this. And instead, I'm going to use a snap swivel here to attach it. So to do that, go ahead and gather the loops just as I had before. And I'm always holding on to them with one hand or the other so they don't change length relative to each other. Alright, the snap swivel you can get in the fishing department of any department store, hardware, sporting goods store. Wherever you get fishing stuff, they'll probably have these. The size really doesn't matter as long as the snap part is large enough to go over the eyelet on the nose cone without binding. Alright, but what I'm going to do now is take my little loops here and thread them through the swivel end, like that. I'm going to open those loops back up. Okay, I've got the swivel hanging here, and now I pass the entire swivel through the loops, pull the loops down, and then pull them taut, like that. Alright, now I'm going to take my parachute again and recheck my measurements. Okay, one of those is looking a little bit long, but probably not enough to worry about. So if you're happy with it, you can go ahead and just put a little dab of glue here. If you're not, you can loosen this and try again. Okay, now I'm not going to loosen mine. It's a little bit off, but not enough to really worry about. And so I'm just going to put a little tiny dab of wood glue on the knot. It was actually a bigger dab than I wanted. And when this dries, that'll just lock that knot there so it doesn't come undone. Okay. Now, the advantage to doing this is I can change the parachute out when I'm storing it. A lot of people don't like to store their parachutes in their rockets. Or, as I said, this is a fairly big parachute for such a little rocket. So if you're launching on a breezy day and you don't want this to end up way far away from your launch site, you could change it out for, say, a 12-inch parachute. All right, for now, I'm going to let that little bit of glue dry, and I'll set this aside. And we're kind of waiting for all the glue to dry right now before we can go on to the next part. My fillets are dry, and I've also built them up a bit using some plastic model contour putty, so you can kind of see the lighter, almost not quite white, but gray. And my next step will be to prime this, and then after it's primed, that will show me some of the finer areas where it needs a little bit more sanding. And then we'll follow that with the base coat of color. Now on my nose cone, I'm a little bit farther ahead on the finishing. So here I've got several layers of filling sandable primer. And my next step here will be to wet sand this with 320 grit sandpaper just to remove any imperfections there. And then this will get its color on top of that. The paint is dried on my Red Max here. And we've got a total here, if I remember correctly, 3 coats of primer and 3 coats of paint. And then on the nose cone, 3 coats of primer and about 5 coats of paint to fill in all of the grooves and sanding scratches and such. Okay, so really all we need to do now is attach everything. So take the other end of our shock cord here. It looks like we've got a little bit of flash in the nose cone. Hadn't noticed that earlier. So just take a hobby knife and cut that out without cutting the eyelets. There we go. There we go. Alright, so once you've got that through, tie a double knot or 2 half hitches in that. Cinch it down really well. Alright, pull from multiple directions. And then once you have that knot pulled tight, cut off any excess on the free end there down to about 5 to 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch. Don't cut it all the way to the knot because it'll come undone. And then you can just take a very small dab of white glue or wood glue. Okay, we're just going to stick that right there on the knot. Again, it doesn't need to be a lot. We're just going to work that into the knot there and help keep that locked in place. Now we can take our parachute, to which we had put on a snap swivel. Alright, open up the snap, put that on there to the inside of the shock cord. Clip that on. Okay, make sure it's moving freely. Alright, and then the parachute here, just make a triangle out of it. Take your shroud lines, kind of make a half loop here, like that. And I just fold the edges over, fold that down, and again. Now if you're excuse me, prepping this for launch, you'd stick probably 4 or 5 pieces of recovery wadding in there. And then we'll put the shock cord down, or parachute down. Right. So as I mentioned, this I'm not going to use the standard decal set for, but instead I'm going to have a custom one that reflects my high school. Okay, so I'm going to leave this video here. Hope you had a great time constructing this rocket. Have a successful launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.